Sup nerds? Today we're going to be talking about crit and stuff, more specifically flat crit chance buffs, or as the scholars like to call it, absolute increases in critical chance. These buffs are very good for a select few weapons, one of which we've covered in yesterday's video. It was the Kuvan Nucor. This weapon has an absolutely enormous base crit multiplier at 5x, but its crit chance is only 7%, so it's not really worth modding for. Now the way these buffs work is they're added at the very end of the crit calculation. So if, for example, we take the Bratton, which has a crit chance of 12%, we add Point Strike, which bumps the crit chance up to 30%, and we then use Arcane Avenger, which gives you 45% absolute crit chance, it will bump it up to 75%. So these do not interact with mods at all, they're added at the very end, they don't get increased by crit chance mods. So if you're using one of these buffs to make a weapon that doesn't ordinarily crit, you're better off modding for crit multiplier rather than crit chance. So, the first absolute increase to critical chance is actually Puncture. The new secondary effect of Puncture adds up to 25% crit chance against enemies that have 5 stacks of Puncture on them. So Puncture weapons are actually very good for crit builds nowadays. Now, 25% extra crit chance is not a ton, but I mean, it's something, right? 25% extra crit chance is not negligible, and it can actually be quite good, especially when combined with some of the other buffs that we will be talking about later, which by the way all stack additively. Next on the menu we have Arcane Avenger. This is a Warframe arcane that gives you up to 21% chance to get 45% flat extra crit chance for 12 seconds to all attacks. This is one of the most passive and easy to utilize sources of flat crit there is, because as long as your Warframe can take a few hits, it will eventually trigger and you get a bunch of extra flat crit. It works on all weapon types and you can put it on essentially any Warframe you want, so this one is very good. Then we have Cat's Eye. This is actually a companion mod and it's for the Adarza Kavat, and it makes the cat give everyone within 25 meters 60% flat crit for 10 seconds every 20 seconds. This is yet another passive and very easy to utilize source of flat crit. It doesn't have perfect uptime, it's only 50% uptime, but I mean the cat's just gonna pop it off cooldown, so you might as well put it on, and if you combine it with Avenger, you have a pretty low effort crit setup. One really cool thing about the Adarza Kavat is that you can very easily get the cat's crit chance over 60%, so you can run Tenacious Bond for a final crit damage multiplier as well. This is a similar multiplier, but for crit damage instead of crit chance. Up next, we have a more limited source of flat crit, and that's the Ballistic Bullseye augment for Messa's Ballistic Battery. This gives you up to 50% extra flat crit chance to the ballistic shot when it's fully charged. The way this works is you press Ballistic Battery, you do a bit of damage to charge it up, once it's charged up you press it again, and then the next shot is gonna have 50% extra flat crit. This one, as I've said already, is not as useful or as easily applicable as the other ones, but it's still a flat crit chance bonus, so there you go. Moving on to Shadow Haze, which is a augment for Sevagoth's Reap. This does two things. Firstly, whenever you kill an enemy that's affected by Reap, it spawns an additional shadow that affects more enemies by Reap, but it also gives you 50% flat crit chance bonus against enemies affected by Reap. This is actually very strong, it spreads itself around, and 50% extra flat crit chance is awesome. This is where it kind of starts to get spicy because you can really start stacking things up. You can run a puncture based weapon on Sevagoth with this augment that also has Arcane Avenger, and you have an Adarza Kavat with Cat's Eye. Like, you can make anything crit with that, very reliably. Now perhaps one of the most well-known sources of flat crit chance is Harrow's Covenant. This provides up to 50% extra flat crit chance on body shots and up to 200% extra flat crit chance on headshots based on the amount of damage absorbed by Covenant. Covenant is the second strongest source of flat crit chance on headshots right after Wrathful Advance, which is limited to melee weapons. So if you want your pew pew to produce a massive crit, this is the one to use. And finally we have Kullervo's Wrathful Advance. This provides at base 200% flat crit chance for melee weapons, but it's affected by strength, so you can actually pump it up higher. This is the strongest source of flat crit chance in the game, but it's only limited to melee weapons. So no gunnery nodes on this one, but at least you can make any melee weapon crit like it's an actual crit weapon. Or it can make a weapon that already crits crit harder. That's also an option. The way you use these is up to you. You can either make weapons that don't normally crit, or you can make weapons that already crit a little bit harder. You can also choose what kind of effort you want to put in. A low effort setup would be a beefy frame with Arcane Avenger and then an Adarza Kavat with Cat's Eye. It's not super reliable, but you know, every now and then you will get Arcane Avenger or Cat's Eye or both and you get a bunch of extra free crit. Or you can do a more involved setup where you run something like Sevagoth and you actually quote unquote prime the enemies for more crit chance with something like Shadow Haze. Or like I do, do on my Sevagoth, you can run everything. I have Shadow Haze, then I have Arcane Avenger, and I run in a Darzakavat. This can make even the Kuva Nucor orange crit at times, which is really good, because you take advantage of that enormous crit multiplier. It makes some weapons really pop off. It's not going to have as much of an effect on everything, it's going to be less useful on some weapons than on others, but on something like the Kuva Nucor, which has a massive base crit multiplier, doing something like this is very beneficial. Now, before I end the video, I quickly want to mention that there are other ways to increase your crit chance. For example, Citrine's Crystallize. The way this one works is a little bit different. It doesn't actually buff your weapons, but it crystallizes the enemies and makes them grow big crystals. If you hit these crystals, your crit chance is set at 300%. So when you shoot these crystals, any weapon is going to ret crit. That is extremely strong. So if you want to make things that don't ordinarily crit, there are other options besides flat crit chance bonuses. And that is pretty much all I have for you today. So I thank you very much for watching. As always, guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video and maybe you learned something new. And finally, I would also like to extend a special thank you to all the channel members. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate your support. It means a lot to me. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.